So why don't we start by just going around and doing some introductions? We've got some of our board joining us remotely. Thank you for coming. It's wonderful to see you. And it's always fun to start with just a bit of good news. And I've got plenty, so I will share that once we get started. But why don't we go around and do a little bit of good news sharing? Shall we start with you, Stuart?
Sure. I have my 5-year-old is now starting pardon? Yeah, he's 5. He's now starting the wonderful application process of kindergarten, which seems in my memory to be actually harder and more work than me applying to medical school. And I was doing an application the day before it was due, of course, because that is really one of the things that seemed more important at the time. And you become slap happy. And at 3 o'clock in the morning, so his name is Henry Sidney Kaplan, and said, "What 3 words best identify your son?" And so I thought to myself, in a room with 1,000 kids, what 3 words would make him and only him stand up and raise his hand? And so I wanted to write Henry Sidney Kaplan. And my wife said, "If you do that, he's getting nowhere." So I changed it, so now there's hope. So that's my good news.
Ah, wonderful. Yes, it is a process, and each step you wonder, how is this so hard to, whether it's kindergarten and then high school? So, but we'll when you get there, we'll give you some.
If anyone wants to apply for kindergarten, I can go on advice, because being older, all my peers have already passed that age.
I want to know if your preschool director wrote a letter of recommendation for your son.
Well, they're going to. We're just in the early stages now, the application process. Trying to say how our son is a different snowflake. And every snowflake who's applying, we're trying to make it sound sincere.
Well, thank you for sharing that good news. Ken, who's here with us from New York.
So, I guess the good news is I'd like to share that Cindy started working with the University of Colorado Boulder in the advanced technology responsive project. The attorney, and so he's going working bringing technology to the public, available, looking for funding. He's also going to help the scientists and other folks in the university learn about how to bring it. But he's going to work both sides.
Congratulations, George.
Yeah, my good news is probably very much related to everybody else. The fact that back to the freedom of doing what we want to do, and although we were quite busy during the COVID, we ended up marrying 2 of my kids. You know, the youngest and the oldest, and we really done very well by bringing in close to 400, 450 people, and none of them had a COVID. So we did the right one. And then freedom gave us the ability to go for our first trip since the COVID. So we and went and spent about 2 weeks in Europe, making a river cruise to other countries in there. And we were not afraid. I mean, we never had the COVID, so we're not afraid of getting it. And of course, we got it. But we went through it with no problem. Everything went well, and so that was about
Great to see you. Good to see everyone in person.
If I can also encourage everybody to just speak up just a little bit, they
Oh,
can.
sure.
Yeah, so that we can capture. Lovely. Good morning, everybody. Gosh, good news. When was the last time we were together? May?
May.
May, okay, great. Well, since then, I retired from the corporate world at the end of May, so I haven't quite fully retired, but got a lot of other things going on, so that was great. And I decided to take up mountain biking. So I got a mountain bike and I've got a couple little scars. It's been a lot of fun and I just love the idea of, just really, having a lot more flexibility and ability to get out on the trails. So that's what I would report.
Wow, we'll keep our eyes open for you.
Hanging down the road.
Good news. It's great to be asking people about good news. And it makes you stop and think about what we should all be in gratitude about. I also retired. I just gave up all my working activities in April. And walked away from all my businesses and activities. And I'm no longer a serial entrepreneur. So that's been really nice. And my son got married. We have one child, 31-year-old son, married a fantastic lady from upstate New York, from Medina, New York, outside of Buffalo. And she's wonderful. They've been together for about 7 or 8 years. And her family is fabulous. And so we just feel blessed that, the bride's great, family's great, it's a good blessing. And so that's good news to end the year with.
Absolutely.
I have a daughter.
And when was the wedding?
It was in October. And I don't have a picture to share because as you walked into this very small affair, all cell phones had to be left at the door. And then the bride gave everybody these Instamatic cameras,
Oh.
and said, we'll take pictures and I'll develop it. She'll put together something. So it was, they don't want to be in social media, although they're both in that world. They are very, very private, but lovely couple. The family, we are so thrilled about the family. Really nice.
Congratulations. That's wonderful. I'm now going to turn it to our guests who are joining us by Zoom. Tom, would you like to share good news with us?
Yes, wonderful news. Our Trishan and my second grandchild is on the way. And our youngest and only daughter is engaged to be married. So that's lots of wonderful things happening in our family. I want to give a very brief little story about our life sciences scholar, Andrew Awadawa. He's now a medical student at the Mayo Medical Clinic in Rochester, Minnesota. And my wife and I met Andrew before COVID for lunch with Dean Sork. And during all the remaining connections were always by phone or by Zoom. And you all made arrangements for my wife and I to meet Andrew it was the end of May or early June. And I'll have to tell you, I walked right past him. And because in the 3 years of that ensuing time, he had grown about 3 or 4 inches. And I have to say, I didn't see his face. I just saw him from the back. And it was just so exciting. So Tracy, maybe it's the water and the food of UCLA. Not only did you develop his brain, you developed his body.
Oh, I love that story. And Andrew is just so delightful. He's one of our LS scholars. And so thank you for all you've done to support him. But I'm super glad you got a chance to get together. You know what? It's true though. For some reason, I thought young people stopped growing by the time they went to college. And this has happened where 2 of the students came back after the summer and I was like, why are you still growing? So.
Tracy, was the other student a boy? Because I think it's rather uncommon for women, but for men, it's not uncommon.
Okay, well, this is, yeah, these are 2 young men, same thing. But Billy, thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me. So I just want to share a refound gratefulness for being in the city of LA. I've been traveling in New York and Miami for the past month or so, and house hunting for a friend. So looking at really great houses, really great views, but we don't miss LA until we're gone. You know, the freezing cold in New York, the lack of choices and great food, choices of food in Miami. So when you think about it, LA is a great city to be in, and we're all very fortunate to be here.
I think that's a wonderful way to launch into our discussion. Thank you, Billy, and thank you everyone for sharing. I feel like doing this more often kind of reminds us of what sort of a wonderful space that we exist in, even though there's a lot that's going on in the world that can sometimes be a distraction. But my gratitude is that Olivia and I have been thinking about this get together and have been really looking forward to just kind of getting ideas and sharing ideas and also telling you a little bit about what's going on in the division. So over the course of the next, I need to thank you. Oh, so I need to, so that, okay. Thank you. I'm so glad Olivia's here because she's like, you over there. But I think what we'll do for the next, hour and a half or so is to talk a little bit about what's happening in the division. And I have 3 really special treats. I always love it when we get to hear from the people here who make UCLA what it is. And we'll have 3 presentations from 2 from faculty, and I'll introduce them in a bit, and 1 from one of our undergraduates. And Lauren is also one of our life science scholars. So I think you're in for a real treat. And these are all people who are doing very different, but really important things in the life sciences. How's that?
Yeah, thank
Okay.
you.
So let me just start by, it's been a busy few years. I started in September of 2020. Actually, it's hard to imagine that it's only been that long ago, but I started in September in 2020, and there's been a lot that's been happening on our campus. A lot of really good things that have happened, but there's also been some challenges. And I think I wanted to just start with what I think, for me has been a really significant part of what's happened this quarter, which is the negotiations with our students, our postdocs, and the researchers. And so I really want to put this into, it's a little bit of the elephant in the room. So I do want to put it into context of what's happening in the life sciences, and I think it helps to frame what some of the directions are that we've been thinking about. So graduate student education is one of the most, and I'm going to just focus on graduate students for the moment, because that's they're part of the United Auto Workers Union, and there's active negotiations right now that are taking place between the University of California Office of the President and the union. I'm on daily strike task force meetings just to hear the latest of what's going on. So these are very active discussions. And unfortunately, I don't know exactly where we're going to land, but what I do want to say is, there's a lot that's out in the kind of public space about what the nature of the concerns are. Let me see if I can do this. Yeah, what the nature of the concerns are. And I think what I wanted to do is to just provide a little context from life sciences perspective. So it's much more complicated, I think, in the life sciences than I think what is often portrayed in the in general and certainly in the media. So I'll take, for example, our graduate program in the biosciences. That's our largest graduate program that covers undergraduate students in life sciences labs. And they're about 550, between 550, 600 students in that program. So it's a significant number of students. The way it works in our program is that our students are all guaranteed a stipend of $39,500. That includes tuition and fees. Students often get fellowships as well, and they also are about the same amount. And the way we define our stipend levels is based on the market. So we look at Berkeley, UCSF, UC San Diego, we look at Stanford, we look at our competitors, and I think it happens within the life sciences that there's a goal of trying to ensure that the stipends are within a comparable range so that that's not the main source of competition between programs. Because at some point, there's a cap. And that cap often comes from the National Institutes of Health. And so where many of us are funded by NIH, and so the amount that we're able to pay is in some ways defined by the NIH. Students, there's a lot of discussion about the teaching function of graduate students. And in life sciences, we think of the teaching function as part of the educational mission. And so TAs are TAing as part of their education. They TA once or maybe twice. And this is in this graduate program. Their research that they do as GSRs, graduate student researchers, is their PhD work. And so the question of how we pay students it's complicated. We have training grants from the NIH. A lot of it comes from faculty members, grants as well. And then there's some amount that comes from block grants that are coming from the state. And so I just wanted to put that in context because I know that when I've talked to, friends and family, you hear these stories about graduate students who are making, amounts that just are not relevant to the way we think about things. So I just want to be clear about that. But I will say that one of the important things to think about, and I'm going to come back to this, is the difference between our current funding levels and the University of California's proposal would, at least for this program, would add about $2 million additional each year. And that's just UCOPs. The difference between the current UAW proposal is about $9 million. So I just want to clarify that because one of the critical things we're trying to figure out is how to bridge the $2 million gap. I can't even get my head around the $9 million gap. And to be clear, that gap cannot necessarily be filled by NIH funds. So just to sort of put a little bit of context, if we talk about the state of education in life sciences, we are very proud of our graduate students. They're amazing. And we believe that they should be supported. And so thinking about this, I'm going to come back to it, but thinking about this, I just want to kind of to name that just to start. And I'll come back to it. Yeah, Diana.
Question I have regarding the market.
Yeah.
You mentioned Stanford.
Yeah.
Being part of that.
Yeah.
What in general is the difference, if any, between, let's say, private universities and the way my needs? I'm just curious
Yeah.
about that because I then wonder, well, where did this?
Where-
when I read about it, I
Yeah.
thought, where are they getting this
Right.
idea? I mean,
Right.
because it does seem like it's very complex in terms of the plans and the other elements that would go into this. I'm just curious how much of a differential it may be there is.
So that is for the life sciences in particular. I can't really speak to outside of the life sciences, but in the life sciences in particular, there are a combination of factors. One is our main funding source, which is NIH, as well as like cost of living, et cetera. But to some extent, a student who sees that they're $39K at the University of Washington in St. Louis and $39K at UC, those numbers are comparable, but they go further in different places. But the number is kind of set by external factors like funding levels for training grants, et cetera.
By the universities, private.
And we're in our graduate program in biosciences, we're quite competitive. Because we have to be, or else we keep losing our best students to other places. So, yeah. So, there's a lot of information that's out there. And one of my frustrations has been that the Office of the President has been very mum about clarifying misconceptions because it's perceived as disrupting the negotiation process. So for our community, I do want to just make clear, since UCOP can't talk about what's really happening, I do want you to have a sense of what's happening in the life sciences, because I want what we do to be consistent with our values. Yeah.
Question, has anyone looked at this from the point of view of the students and the pressures of housing, the cost of housing in this area, food,
Mhm,
gas,
mhm,
cars, what have you,
mhm,
because of the relative costs here compared to
mhm,
Missouri or something?
mhm.
And if that's been studied, how does that factor in? For example, is there still a graduate student housing that's subsidized? So how is there more than just the money?
Yeah.
What other things have been considered?
Yeah.
Relieving the pressure on the.
Well, I will say some of that is in negotiation now. But I will also say that there is a push to increase graduate student housing. There is subsidized graduate student housing. It's Los Angeles, there's not enough. But there is graduate student housing that is both in place and more being developed. And I also think that one of the things that we do quite frequently is we survey our students about cost of living related issues. And nobody's getting rich in graduate school. They'll get a PhD at the end of it, which hopefully will launch them in that direction. But I think we have a whole staff that's really focused on graduate student physical and mental health. But you know what? The pandemic has made everything more challenging. And I think that we're still trying to work our way back to building community where we are constantly assessing how the students are doing. Yeah.
So the number is 2 million, 9 million. Does that apply only to life sciences? Or if that only applies to life sciences, are you able to negotiate with all the other divisions of UCLA? Because it seems that everyone, in a sense, is going to be in the same boat, proportional to the number of students they have in their budget.
Yeah.
But that number, if you shook your head yes for those people that were watching at home, but if it's just 9 million for life sciences, then it has to be a significantly higher number for the entire UCLA campus itself.
The numbers across the campus are being worked out for every different unit. And there's been a lot of focus on trying to understand it from each departmental program level. And so collectively, that's exactly what we're doing, figuring out what the bottom line number is, number one, and then number two, doing the work to negotiate how we get this funded.
We negotiate
As a university and then as a system, both. So like our executive vice chancellor and provost is working with the other provosts at all the other UC campuses with our data to try to go collectively to the Office of the President and then ultimately to the legislature, because we can't do it alone. I think that's pretty clear. So, and we can come back to this. I just wanted to start here and then get to my good news. But just to kind of start here, because this is something that I think has been on everyone's mind, certainly ours. But I want to say a little bit more about the state of education in the life sciences. So this may look familiar to you. I've shown this to you before, but it's got an additional data point. And we continue the trend of having the largest number of undergraduates in the division. We are now over 10,000 students this last year. And a couple years ago, we surpassed the social sciences, but there's no sign of students turning in a different direction. So I think we have a sense of some of the reasons why this is the case. Not only are our students' numbers increasing, and this is also, there's an additional data point, but this also gives a sense of what the demographics of our students are. So in that increase in numbers, our students are becoming increasingly diverse, and you can see the numbers are increasing, but also, for example, if you were to just, I know you can't see the numbers, but if you just zero in on the green and zero in on the blue, those are students who are who identify as Hispanic or Black. And so from in the last 10 years or so, those numbers have increased quite significantly. So while we increase our students, we're also increasingly representing the demographics of the state of California, which is something that we're really quite proud of. One of the things that drew me to UCLA when I first came here in 2013 is that we were thinking already about how do we deliver an education that works for everyone. And I think these statistics are something that I'm really proud of. So around the time that, for instance, I came and looking at the students who start with STEM majors and who graduate with STEM degrees, what you see in blue are those students from those underrepresented demographics, the primarily Black, Native American, and Hispanic. And the students who started and finished with STEM degrees was about less than 50%. Even for students who are outside of that demographic, 30% of the students were not finishing their STEM majors. And remember, UCLA is recruiting the best and brightest students in the state. So this is something that I think has been really a focus. How is it that, and I should say this is not STEM, only STEM, this is life sciences specifically. And so we're better than the national, where 80% of students from underrepresented groups were leaving and 60% were, but these were certainly not statistics that any of us were particularly proud of. And I will say one of the things that when you look at the overall numbers of students in life sciences and the increase, that is not, a contributing factor to that is that we don't lose students, that students who start in STEM are graduating with STEM degrees. This is something that we're extremely proud of. I think we have room for even more, but certainly there are some students who might, for very good reason, decide that they want to be humanities majors, and that's fine. We're okay with that, as long as students who leave life sciences are not doing so because there's a culture, climate, or pedagogy that is not supportive. But one of the things that I'm particularly excited about is just looking at how we've now narrowed the gap between different demographics of students. I should say that about 35% of our students are the first in their families to go to college. And if we look at the retention rate of those students, it also follows in this same pattern that we're narrowing the gap between our student demographics of those who start and finish in STEM degrees, which is something that I'm really quite excited about. Students are satisfied with the quality of what they're getting in life sciences. And so this is a student survey that's given at the end of the time that they're at UCLA. And when they're graduating, they're asked questions like, how satisfied are you with your educational experience, or how satisfied are you with the intellectual challenges that you've experienced in the life sciences? And we look at life sciences majors and minors. The majors are shown in the orangish brown line, and the minors are in blue. But in both cases, we've got 90% or plus students who say that they're satisfied with their educational experience. And similarly, we've got 90% plus who say that they're satisfied with the level of challenge that they've experienced. So we've got students who are coming to us in droves, they're staying, and they're satisfied with the quality of the experience that they're getting. And so I just want to share this with you because I think that a lot of what we're about is making sure that we can continue this trajectory, but even make it better. So how is this possible? I mean, there are a number of things that we are doing to think about, and I'm always excited about input from all of you, but I think this illustrates one example. So during the pandemic, we realized that there was a lot of staff who were no longer needing to be on campus. And so we thought, okay, what can we do differently with space? And so one of the concerns for students that there just wasn't enough collaborative learning space. This is a building that was primarily administrative. It was new furniture and converted so that it could be a collaborative learning space where students work together, where there are opportunities for team teaching and collaborative and peer learning. This is just an example of the kind of thing that I think allows us to see the kind of effects that we have with, for example, retention. So this is the good news. We've got the students. We're really thinking carefully about how we deliver the kind of educational experience that these students deserve. So one of the things, and this is the figure that I just showed you, I'm going to share a couple of the things that we're recognizing as our critical needs. One is faculty hiring, and I think this illustrates it very clearly. So what's shown in yellow are the faculty student ratio in social sciences. This is the faculty student ratio in the life sciences. And so as we increase our number of students, we have not been able to adequately maintain our numbers of faculty, both because of retirement, but also because it's just a unit that's grown, and our models of how to sustain the growth haven't caught up with the needs of building out capacity within the division. So faculty hiring to meet the teaching and research needs, I think, is one of our key priorities. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that. A second priority and a second challenge comes with the amazing growth, right? So one of the questions in that student survey that students are asked is, how do you feel about your availability of classes? And that's where we don't do quite so well. And I think it's related to the last slide, which is, it's just hard to deliver the quality experience to the same number of students. And so we've been creative in having classes at odd times and bringing in really talented lecturers, but ultimately this is a systemic issue that is something that I consider one of my really important challenges. Let me just use an example of psychology. So psychology is our largest undergraduate major, and this is a perfect case study. So psychology has seen 87% growth in undergraduate in the last 15 years. And there's been no growth really in space, in terms of pure space, and FTE, or the faculty units of faculty hiring. So we have about over 2,300 students in psychology. And this class I like to highlight. So Psych 116 is required for neuroscience majors and psychology majors, and it's an incredible class. It's one of a kind, state-of-the-art exposure to techniques that are neuroscience related, hands-on experiences. All the students it's a required course for the psychology majors. And in the last 4 years, the demand has outstripped the supply of that class by about 44%. So we're sort of in this time where we've got to figure out solutions. So I'll tell you one of the reasons why that's the case is because the physical space where we've been holding the class, which was fine 15 years ago, is simply not sustainable. So you may not be able to see it, but oops, what did I do? You may not be able to see it so well, but it's not in the best condition. But one of the critical pieces is that there's the computational work that has advanced significantly in the last 15 years, and the wet science, the wet lab work, and the space hasn't accommodated the need to have those different approaches to the science. And so in a single space, they're trying to do both the computer work and the wet lab work. So this is, it's hard to imagine a #1 public university with the #1 major at UCLA. This is what we are working with. And in fact, if I look just as another example, this sort of spells out some of the issues. So the maximum capacity in this room is 24 students, for example, and it's in constant use. There's not room for student collaboration. Fortunately, you can't see the ceiling. It's not an attractive space, and it doesn't meet modern day standards. So this is an example of like, there's a lot of really good we're doing, but then there's some things that are just fundamentally making it difficult for us to really achieve the optimal educational experience for our students. And so we've been thinking about, this is the creative piece, how do we accommodate this? So some of our faculty have, with this generous gift from Martin Lucretz, have moved into a new building, the Lucretz, the Botany building, which has opened up space that we're now trying to convert this beautiful space into space that can be used to run the lab. It would increase the enrollment 67%. It would accommodate lab and computational desks. It would make a staging space with microscopes. And so then if we do that, then that space that you looked at a few minutes ago would not be used for undergraduate teaching, which is a totally inappropriate use for a space. We could imagine converting that into one of the shops that's used in psychology for equipment repair and such. So the building that currently exists in, or that space, could be converted into space for faculty. So we are hiring faculty, space to put faculty. We can move the shop into a location that makes more sense, and then have a space where our undergraduates are in a laboratory that's befitting the quality of the education we want to deliver. So this, I'm sharing this level of detail just to give an idea of some of the creative strategies that I think we're ready to deploy, and I'm excited about, but I wanted to bring it to you so that you can sort of see some of the challenges we're thinking about. So after our last meeting, one of the things that I heard loud and clear is, let's be specific about what does it take to really meet the needs of the division. And so that's what this is about, and that's what this slide is about, to really get really granular about what's needed. So first of all, I think what's clear is that at least in the short term, as we're figuring out how to, deal with the increases in graduate support, we're thinking about fellowships. And what I mean by stopgap funding is the difference between what NIH funding is available for faculty who've already written their grants and the increase in graduate student support, which happens within 3 months of the approval after the negotiations are completed. So graduate student support becomes a very critical issue for us. We want to hire, and we clearly need to hire, the best and the brightest faculty. You're going to hear from one of our best and brightest in a little bit. And it's just an example. We recruit amazing people at UCLA. That requires space, that requires startup packages, and to be competitive, those require resources. I think I've shared that we have the need for capital infrastructure, and I think the psychology 116 is just an example that there are lots of things that we can do if we take certain steps in terms of capital improvement. Undergraduate student support is always something that we're looking at, especially since so many of our students are working while they're trying to take advantage of all the things that UCLA has to offer. So I would say that Olivia and I have talked a lot about, like, what are our, if we could say, what are our 4 needs right now? These are our 4 greatest needs. And I would share that this life science scholars program, which I think you heard a little bit about from one of the students, Andrew, who's one of the scholarship recipients. Each year we offer 3 new undergraduate scholarships. And I know it's just a drop in the bucket, but these are students who we offer these scholarships in part to get them to come here instead of other places. And I will tell you, these are rock stars. You'll meet one of them. She's going to give a presentation. She's a 3rd year. She's going to tell you a little bit about her research. So why don't I just stop for a moment, and I'm happy to, we can have a discussion. I'm happy to take questions, input, suggestions. And Olivia, you can, I don't know if you're, yeah, you can keep that.
Yeah.
I would just say that it seems that this problem, I remember when Dean Sork gave us a tour of the psychology building and the condition that it was in, and saying here psychology is one of, if not the top program in the United States. that these problems only seem to be increasing because the success of UCLA in attracting these students is demanding more faculty. More students want to come here. And so it seems, and I actually feel through as I listen to this lecture, that it's just the more success you have, the steeper these curves and gaps seem to become.
Yeah.
Just a comment on, it's got to be difficult.
And I will also say, for example, with the kind of the generosity of the Pritzker family, we were able to make an amazing, and this is at our next meeting, I would love to kind of go and visit it. Beautiful renovation of Pritzker Hall. Didn't add a lot of space, but it upgraded. And that was a huge step forward. It means also, unfortunately, the spaces that I talked about are in the adjacent building that we haven't yet been able to renovate, but it gave us a sense of what's possible. And if you go over to Pritzker Hall, you see students who are working in this kind of this beautiful glass atrium, and it's fantastic. So it's been a long-standing issue, but we see what's possible. And I think understanding how to get from possible to reality, that's why I'm working with all of you. But yeah, but thank you for that, Stuart, because it is a challenge. We're victims of our own success. And yeah.
Three different questions. I have to do it like that or I forget what they are. Number one, you have the problem of being successful. And that puts you in a different situation there. If you look at businesses that are successful but don't have the funding to, or the resources to grow, and I'm sure Ron can tell us about what that's like. They end up selling their business because they can't afford to sustain the additional growth. So questioning that, are you someday thinking of limiting the number of students to be more competitive to get in, but thinking because you can't, university won't sustain that growth? Second question is, have you had any programs reaching out to the undergrads who 5 years out and what they thought of their education then and what kind of jobs they have and what kind of income? Do you routinely look at that population? And then the third one is, when is the last time you reached out to all the life science alumni asking for the resources and support?
Three wonderful questions. So I'll start with the first one about enrollment. And it's a question we talk about a lot. Our challenge is that the regents and the state have made it very clear that we cannot cap enrollment. I don't understand the logic, but Berkeley and UCLA are both slated to continue to grow. And so some of the ways in which we've been trying to think about it is like, do we increase our online presence? Just because there are so many students who want to be here. So we kind of don't have a choice. We still have to figure out how to continue to deliver what we deliver under the mandate of growth. That's the first issue. The second is to the question of looking closely at our alumni. So I just had a meeting last week with our alumni collaborator, and we're doing exactly that for two reasons. Because we want to know where our students are, and we want to keep our former students close, so that so that we can be an asset to them, and if they can support us in a variety of ways. Yeah, so I think we're doing that more now at a divisional level than we have in the past, and we absolutely have to. And frankly, if 90% of our students say that they're getting a good experience, we should be tapping into that experience for a variety of reasons, including philanthropy. And And I'm going to show you a video. Our new motto is our freshmen are our future alumni. So from the moment they walk on campus, we want them to have the experience that they know that they have a place. So then the third question is reaching out to all of our alumni. And we are working on that. I don't think we've done that quite to the extent. We do send our alumni kind of updates, but there may be a different way of engaging than we're doing. And I think we're open to exploration. I don't know if Olivia or if Janice, if there's a different way that third piece we can talk about, but I do think that is room for us to grow.
I think that's exactly what I would add is it is an area that we are continuing to work on. We do have opportunities through a class LS core, for example, in which alumni will come back as guest speakers, especially in different industries, whether it's a career panel or whatnot, and speak with our undergraduate students. And then our alumni are also included in many of the different communications we send out, whether it's a message from the dean with an update, or sharing the impact and the great things that's happening, or whether it's solicitations and asking for support for very specific areas or our department. But it is an area that we are continuing to try to do more in, and it's, as you can imagine, a process.
Yeah. Yes.
Probably, I mean, relative to that is, I'm not sure how much has been done over in Europe, but there is a system where they will always follow the alumni and find the success that these guys are doing and have a program for recognition, just to bring them closer. Once you recognize them, you attach them back to the university, and I think this is what's very much is needed to keep them going.
Yeah.
I'm not sure how much of that is.
Yeah. When you say recognize, how do you, let me make sure I understand.
I mean, you probably have to look at it at different levels. I mean, where some people will be recognized at, just depending on what they have contributed. What's their contribution to the world, contribution to the community. Others will be recognized for their level of expertise that they've got to. Others could be the power itself. So, but regardless what it is, I mean, we're not only looking at the level of their richness. We're talking about anything else as well.
Yeah, I think that's I think that really resonates. If I think about my own, my own experience, where I got my PhD, when I get the little flyer that talks about what other alumni are doing, I always I mean, I don't even know that I read the rest of it. I always look and see if I recognize anybody who's, been nominated for some big award or in the National Academy or whatever. So I think that is a really great point. I think it's a really great point. And then people feel connected in that way. Yeah. Yeah.
I was gonna say, following with what Joyce said, a lot of the alumni magazines depend on the alumni to submit their own accomplishments. Maybe another way to do it is to just have a database that have all the alumni in there and just track their accomplishments through public, literature, newspapers, magazines, new additions to the National Academy, and then just put, not just year by year, but just, this is what we've accomplished in the last 3 months or since this came out, and not depend on the alumni themselves, because a lot of us get busy, a lot of things are, more related to family and things like that. But if you could just list all of people, say, wow, that is amazing, I want to contribute to this university. This is absolutely amazing, and do it proactively instead of depending on them to submit their accomplishments.
It's a great idea. It's a really good one. Yeah. Yeah. And we have our life sciences communications that come out in various forms throughout the year. And I think it would be fairly straightforward to identify handful of people to continually think about as
Mhm.
someone, as individuals to recognize. So without them having to volunteer, you're right.
Even more than a handful. Highlight just the most interesting, diverse ones, let's say, just to appeal to largest group, and then say, and then everyone else, not just honorable mentions as afterthoughts, but you can't mention everyone. This is just a snapshot, and you have another 50 other people,
Mhm. Mhm.
and you're not grouping it by class,
Mhm.
because we all tend to look, as you said, when I get any, I go, oh, who do I recognize? from my
Yeah,
class? I
yeah.
don't get anyone from, 4 years before, or 4 years after.
Uh-huh, uh-huh. Yeah, I like that. I think Olivia's taking lots of notes. These are great suggestions.
Be interesting to have that as a project for students within each
Mm, mhm,
section, each department and so on, so they will themselves realize how many of these allow
mhm.
get successful, so they will look for it, to find
That's a
them.
great idea to be part of a legacy.
Yeah,
And we have a life sciences, I have a wonderful board of students who are now a Dean's Advisory Board, and we meet and they have lots of ideas and suggestions. But they're also really helpful in doing things like setting up for events because they get to interact with faculty and other people. So I think that's a great place to start. Yeah, wonderful idea. Diana, do you have any?
I just, coming to the UCLA undergrad, where I did go, they were very effective early on in building this notion, a culture of philanthropy.
Yes.
Right from the start, starting with parents and the parents being invited to gatherings. And I was so interested, my mom knew so much about what was going on,
Mhm.
building that, she's a UC brewer. But the idea of creating that, well, maybe you're not here now, but you're here because you're special. And they kept doing that.
Yeah,
You're special.
yeah.
You're going to do great things. And it wasn't about money. It's more about the idea of you're benefiting because you're special
Mhm.
and you're going to be able to
Pass this
continue
on.
this wave of giving and promoting how phenomenal this is.
Mm.
And now that there is this notion, I'm on a number of nonprofit boards of small gifts, creating small gifts. You may not be able to give 1,000 or 5,000, but you can give $25
Mhm.
and online, just
Mhm.
this, really this sort of focus on this micro or ongoing transaction at a low level. Oh gosh, putting students together, after you're at lunch, there are gatherings around particular topics and careers, but it's very much about community and being something special and having the privilege of contributing. How heavy that
Yeah.
task.
I think people often feel like it only is a contribution if they can at the $100,000 level. And I think, but I think that's really kind of lowering the bar, or not lowering the bar, but lowering the the giving level so that somebody who graduates and says, look, I only have $50, but I just had such a great experience. This is where I want to start. I think that's how philanthropy, the culture of philanthropy is really nurtured. I think you're absolutely right.
The other thing I will share is that I took a loan for as an undergraduate, and I remember, and I don't know, maybe this is something similar in terms of scholarships or something here, but I had to take out for loans. I was $100 for it enrolling, and I was panicked, as a 19-year-old. I just thought, oh my God, I've got to call home. It's so lovely that I got over that. And then years later, I was in graduate school. They send me a cancel with a letter thanking for having paid back student loan on time and how phenomenal is this, because the funds are available for other deserving. It was just like, get my check. It was this you're special.
Yeah.
Thank you. It was, to me, that was just so, it was something so simple,
Mhm.
but obviously it's been like 25 years. I still remember how I felt getting something like that. But it really made me feel bonded
Yeah.
to
Connected to it. Place.
and we've already got so much, there's so much wonderful, so many wonderful things that you're doing. But my thought was that the students can see that even if they're not rich now, they can start thinking about helping others at, $5 a month, just building that, just that mindset.
I think, I love that. And, maybe this is a good time to show the video. I don't know. What do you, Olivia? Let's do that because we're thinking very similarly. And I want to show this video because some of the things before I'm not going to, just in the interest of time, because our faculty speakers are here, I was going to share some of the new initiatives that we're excited about. But one of the things, I'll just tell you some of the priorities. The first is particularly post-COVID, building our community. And it goes to building a culture in the moment students arrive on campus so that they feel like they're part of something special and that they know that we care about them. Really address the career needs of our students. And I love this because I know, Tom, I know hopefully you noticed this. I don't know we'll be able to get into it too much, but we've had lots of conversations about how do we support the career aspirations of students? For example, students who want to go to medical school, what do we build into the curriculum to prepare them for that and to have more advising? And so we're building a new master's program to help to support some of those transitions. We're developing a new center for reproductive science. And I think it was 3 board meetings ago, maybe. Amanda Clark came and spoke about her work, her stem cell research, and she is now the director of this new center, which we're super excited about, which goes from the science around reproductive biology to all the way to thinking about sort of fertility as in more the sociology related to issues around reproduction and fertility and pregnancy. And then, of course, 2 of our other initiatives I've mentioned in the past is marine science and neuroscience. And so these are some of the things that are on the horizon, but I think I'm gonna, without going into detail about all of those, this first one about building the life sciences community, I'd love to show you an example of what we're doing because it really speaks to some of the suggestions that you've had here today. So why don't I?
And before we do that.
Yeah. Oh, did Tom have a question? I'm sorry.
Tom, did you?
No. I sometimes I go forward to listen, but hear better.
All right, thank you, Tom.
All right. Kelly, did you?
I'll take it from here.
So this is, sorry, one second. Oh, yes. Go ahead.
So one of the things that we recognize. One of the things that we recognize is that our students have had on campus in the beginning of the year in a way that they felt like they were starting something special when they were raised. And so this fall, and part of this was kind of thinking about some of the conversations I've had with you. How do we build that into our welcoming? And so over in this Apple Garden, we had over the course of a couple of hours, how many students was it? 500 altogether? Or was it more than that? I think it was about, yeah, who came through. We had all of the different departments where the majors, where they could talk to student affairs officers with questions. They, at the beginning of it, we had the students could get, the beginning, was it churros? Sure. Yeah, we had churros in the beginning, at the end of it, we had ice cream, because we need to move them through. a lot of students. And they kind of rode their way through the garden. We had different services on campus, whether they were commuter services or transfer student services or technological services. We had those groups also situated around the garden. And it was wonderful for us because they're our partners. They gave our students successfully through. And then faculty came, and it was just, I mean, it was wonderful to kind of see building relationships. And I still have students who saw me on campus. How great it was. So this is the idea of like, making sure students know what they're part of from day one. So I just thought,
And this is the first one that we've done.
first one we've ever done.
Yeah.
Yeah, first one we've ever done. It was really critical to do it. I think it was, you know, just coming out of COVID. And I will say, Shaylee, when she was my administrative assistant, she was masterful. Like at one point, she showed me the numbers, and I was like, we can't do that. How are we gonna get all the students in it? And it worked out wonderfully. So why don't we show you the little video of it? Larger community.
Tom, can you hear us? Okay.
Right?
Tracy,
Yeah.
to George's comment about including parents and building, making that for that community. In fact, this year we started for the first time, actually sending welcome emails to the parents of all life sciences students. So depending on their major, their child's major, they would get an email from the department chair. If they didn't declare a major, then the welcome email was from Tracy as the dean of life sciences. And I think that was a really wonderful way to get the parents and let them know like how welcoming they were. We're like, you must be so proud of your student. This is all about the life sciences community and so welcome. So I thought that was really, you know, we just thought that was,
Mhm.
I agree with you, how important it is to get parents also involved in our community.
And shortly after that, a few weeks later, many parents came onto campus for the Brilliant Family Weekend, in which they attended a number of activities. They got to hear different faculty, and then during the dean's lunch, which is held on a Friday, we have faculty from across the division and the department as well as ourselves. And we talked to many of the different parents, and they loved the experience. So
Sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead. I think that a lot of parents just think UCLA is just a huge place.
and that their child is going to get lost. And I think all of these emails, these communications, these touch points puts a human person, like, right, they have a connection with a person, and the place doesn't feel so big. And but that, I mean, the emails were very much about supporting the success of their students in life sciences.
Just going back to really what everyone else has said, so it's a different perspective. In terms of applying things to schools like kindergarten and elementary school, the schools are completely unabashed in asking for donations from parents, from grandparents. They're not shy about it. They're not saying, welcome, this is a community. They're saying, how much can you give? And they're very, very direct, because if you add, and I forgot which meeting it was, where a quote was given that the state only provides 9%, or that's the number I remember, but I could be off, of the money that goes toward paying for each student. That was actually shocking to me for a state school. The other thing, building on what everyone else said, I went to a small school in New York City, Horace Mann High School, and I was on scholarship. And as soon as I graduated, I got requests for donation, like within 3 months. And they had presidential circle, 50,000, chancellor circle, 25,000, benefactor, 10,000. And then they had friends, $500. And then I wrote my own line and I wrote, buddy. And I wrote $100. And I got a handwritten letter back saying, you know what, we really appreciate all the buddies that we can get. But they also did other things like competitions to see which class, which division. And it didn't matter, it wasn't the amount, it was the participation and the divisions themselves. And they broke the class up, and they had different student representatives, because it's very different if the university is writing a letter versus if one of your classmates is making a personal phone call saying, hey, you know what, we're like 5% behind, you know, this class. All we need is just a small amount, even $5. That'll get us over the top, because we don't have that competitive instinct. So that might be something that we can add as well.
Or even the departments, you know, instead of a departmental competition.
But student to student,
Yeah.
as opposed to department or university.
Going back to alumni, you know, I'm the class of 72 in the history department. And, you know, I'm just thinking about my class. First of all, I don't know anyone from my class. All right, I hung out at Bunch Hall. I live close to campus. You know, this is UCLA, not USC. And when I run into alumni in all kinds of places from UCLA, it's a whole different experience if you're with people from USC. And my generation thinks of UCLA as a public institution. I would imagine that the people out of my class are not even aware of the needs for funding here at UCLA. And then again, when I'm looking at my class, we're all retiring. We're all out of business. I think, you know, if you kind of like, I mean, I don't hear that much from the UCLA Alumni Association. I once joined it so I could get a healthcare plan. But aside from that, and my involvement here, I don't think there's great outreach. But I think if you possibly, if you took the classes and really, you know, got onto the micro level and started touching people about the needs here at the university, people in their 70s are going, okay, what do I do? Where can I give? I think there's a prime opportunity there. But from my experience, I don't know anybody from my graduating class.
I think one of the messages that I'm hearing very clearly is that one of our assets, you know, we're constantly thinking about what are our assets, is one of our clear assets is our alumni community. And I think what we've been consciously trying to do within the division in terms of the education, I think we're kind of bolstering that asset. But we haven't tapped into it in enough, and that there may be creative ways of doing so. This has been, you know, super helpful, including families and parents and friends of the UCLA alumni and then the UCLA community.
Tracy? Tracy?
Yeah. Hi. Hi.
One other slice that I think is very powerful is that when both the parent and the child are UCLA graduates. And I think that that's ripe for opportunity. The second point is, once a person donates 1,000 or above, there's a lot of outreach. I mean, I'm getting multiple emails from UCLA, fundraising. So there might be a focus of how do you get that parent and student from UCLA, mostly I'm talking the parent now, because they probably have the resources to get up to that $1,000 level. And I think that that's a critical juncture, as you said, starting at the $50, but how you could, perhaps there's some opportunity there.
Yeah, and I think that to that point, I can't remember where I learned this, but most of our the folks who have been some of the largest contributors to the university, not just life sciences, started off as giving $100, and I think the stewardship also becomes a really important piece of it. So this has been a really wonderful discussion. I think now, and I'll just, what I'll do is I'll share with you the slides that I was going to just kind of give you an overview of some of our new initiatives. I think I mentioned 5. And so that you can kind of get a sense of what's on the horizon. We've got a lot of really exciting things happening. But just in the interest of time, I think what I'll do now is we'll shift gears a little bit, because I'd really love for you to see what is amazing about UCLA from some of the people who are doing it. You want to take a quick stretch and then we can transfer our technology. Elsa Ordway is going to kick us off. So it's really a pleasure to have the opportunity to introduce Dr. Elsa Ordway. So Elsa did her PhD at Stanford in Earth Systems Science and was a postdoc at Harvard and then at Carnegie up north, and came to UCLA in 2021. That's crazy. I was like, when I wrote that down, I was like, that's not possible. So she hasn't been here that long, but I think what you'll see is that already she's made a big impact. Her research is on global environmental change, forest ecology, tropical ecology, and she's really been taking the lead in a number of areas, including forging our relationships internationally, so for an international perspective on climate and forest and ecology. And I will say, it's been such a pleasure to get to work with Elsa. Being dean is hard, to be honest with you. Sometimes it's really challenging, but the best thing about it is when you get to see and meet and interact with just amazing faculty. And I think Elsa is one of those examples. So I will turn it over to you.
Thank you, Tracy. And I have to say, I mean, I am still very new here, but having the fearless leadership of Tracy at the helm has truly been an incredible part of being here. Today, I'm going to talk a little bit about, well, a lot about the work I'm doing in partnership with the Congo Basin Institute. And CBI, as I'll refer to it, is really a big component of what drew me to UCLA. It's an incredibly rare thing for an institution like UCLA to have formal ties internationally, especially with countries in a place like Africa. So it's incredibly special. And what I want to talk about today is the importance of, I think, what CBI can do in terms of playing a role in UCLA's capacity to engage in inclusive and innovative research in Africa. Why Africa? I mean, there's a lot of reasons, but I think one of the most kind of poignant statistics is that by roughly 2050, we'll have about 25% of the world's population is going to be African. As we see kind of population saturated in a lot of places, it's still growing incredibly rapidly in Africa. And that leads to a lot of challenges with respect to human health and development, many, many things, but it also leads to this incredible opportunity. There's a huge number of incredibly bright minds in the African continent. who are grappling with and struggling with the fact that they don't have adequate resources. And there's an opportunity for UCLA to engage, I think, in a really meaningful way in supporting that future. Before I dive into the Congo Basin Institute and who we are and where we're going, I just want to introduce myself very, very briefly. My group, as Tracy mentioned, is really focused around this theme of doing research at the cutting edge, focused on forest ecosystems and global change, thinking about how they're responding to land use change, climate change. A lot of that's in the tropics, a lot of it's also here in California. And I have only been here for about a year and a half, but I have a rapidly growing group of undergrads, grad students, and postdocs who are involved in this work. So for those who have never heard of the Congo Basin Institute, I just want to set the stage a little bit. The Congo Basin Institute is a joint partnership between UCLA and the International Institute for Tropical Agriculture, IITA. It was established in 2015. Tom Smith is the current faculty director of CBI here at UCLA, and I work very closely with him. UCLA also established its first foreign affiliate, which is CBI in its 100-year history, which again, just is this step towards formalizing and supporting that institutional relationship in Africa, which is really huge. What we are is a collaborative and equitable approach to international research and education. There's this long history in Africa of colonialism and exploitation and interference in progress that we are trying to very much openly address and acknowledge in the work that we do and confront head on. CBI's mission is to engage deeply and equitably and permanently in a very, very long-term way with communities, researchers, and academic institutions. The way we like to think about it with our partners here and in Africa is in Africa for Africans. For that reason, because it's very much, it's got this large mission, it's inherently important for us to think big and be broad in our scope. So it's not just set out to pursue a narrow line of research, but it's really meant to facilitate community engaged research broadly. We do have some focal areas. Do you want me to take chat questions or leave those for now? Okay. We have some focal areas that have historically been a big part of CBI. These are biodiversity conservation, climate change, human health, and food security. And I'll talk a little bit about kind of other directions we're moving in. And I think it's important to emphasize too that CBI is not just UCLA and IITA. It's really about partnerships far and wide. And these range from the University of Yaoundé in Cameroon and the University of Chang in Cameroon to university partners here across the United States, and non-academic institutions too are really critical in terms of our ability to do what we want to do. I'm going to talk about a few specific things today, but I just want to highlight some what I think are really kind of exciting and important parts of who we are. This photo up here, I was just in Cameroon for the last few weeks. I got back this past weekend. This photo I took a couple weeks ago. This is a woman from an indigenous Baka community near a forest reserve where we work. And I'll talk about the School for Indigenous and Local Knowledge that CBI developed. She's telling a Likano, a story that is traditional to her peoples. And it's an important way to transmit knowledge from one generation to the next about ecosystems that these communities are no longer allowed to live in, but traditionally have been hunter-gatherers in and lived nomadically in for a really long time. It's their way of transmitting the knowledge about the importance of these ecosystems for medicinal purposes, for food, for resources. There's a huge amount of knowledge that has been lost with these communities being forced out of certain forest areas. And so through the School for Indigenous and Local Knowledge, we're working really closely with these communities to find ways to creatively continue the transmission of that knowledge and do it in a way that motivates some of the younger folks in the community. Each of these photos has a story like that. I'm not going to go into detail for the sake of time for each one, but I do want to just highlight there's examples like that, whether it's with communities, community presentations and organization decision-making. There's faculty. This is Professor Eric Fokum, who we support and engage with regularly along with his students. Long-term data collection. Ernest Simpo here is showing one of these trees on this phenology data set that's being collected every single month for years. There's networking that happens among faculty and students at institutions across Central African countries. And there's tons of training and workshops that are a part of what we do too. This is a GIS workshop on campus in Cameroon. So in terms of putting numbers to what we are doing currently, we are collaborating on research. That's kind of the front and center of the research component. We've funded, since 2015, the establishment of CBI, 38 grants totaling over $14 million. For 43 peer-reviewed papers have come out of that work. There's also an infrastructure development component to this. So there's 2 research stations that already exist and a third that we're currently working on. GIS, so for geographic information systems, and computing labs that are being developed in partnership with our collaborators. I'll talk about what a flex tower is in a little bit. That's something that I'm leading. It's a really critical measurement system for climate change. We're also developing other types of labs and research facilities. The School for Indigenous and Local Knowledge I mentioned briefly, SILK, is a really key component of what we do that supports Baka communities in preserving their very, very unique traditional knowledge, and also tries to find ways through their kind of urging and interests in how to do so, but in empowering them as teachers and researchers to engage with a variety of different communities. And then there's many, many different ways we carry out different training and supervising and mentoring activities. We've supported 147 students through specific grants. These are about $5,000 per grant that's gone towards supporting almost 150 students, and 31 were awarded this year. And then I'd say from the trainings and workshops and things like that that have been carried out, we've reached over 1,000 students and many more to come. 2 projects that I think exemplify how we try to engage both on the research side and community engagement side in ways that we hope are very, very embedded and meaningful and long lasting. So one is the School for Local Indigenous and Local Knowledge. I took this photo a few weeks ago too. This is Moise in the white hat here, is an elder in the community. And he's working with 2 of the younger guys in the community, and they do this data collection on a monthly basis that allows them to get back into the forest and engage around what they're collecting data on with respect to phenology or animal abundances. They're a part of this long-term data collection process. They're the ones who are helping to analyze that, but they're also out there transmitting knowledge and then bringing that back to their community. The Ebony Project is a project that is supported by and in partnership with Taylor Guitars, and it's a pretty new approach to forest restoration. So working with communities to think about this really important ebony tree, which is used as a high value tree species, takes hundreds of years to get to maturity. So you cut one down, it's going to take another few hundred years to replace that. And so that's a very long-term process. And with that, there's engagement in communities for reforesting things that will be more beneficial to them in the short term, like food crops and fruit trees. Where are we going? There's really this focus around continued capacity building, but with research, infrastructure, and partnership at the core of that. And I really think it's going to be important to continue to pursue a lot of the activities we've been pursuing with respect to things like biodiversity conservation, and also expanding into more work focused around things like food and water security, energy security, and climate change, and human health. UCLA is incredibly well poised to be a big player in that, in these communities. One thread I'm going to follow here now to the end is just to give you this example of how I'm thinking about one of these bubbles, which is climate change, and the role that Africa, in particular the Congo Basin, plays in how we think about climate change solutions and research. So tropical forests are incredibly important globally. They cover less than 10% of the Earth's ice-free land surface, but they have over 2/3 of the world's biodiversity, and they're incredibly, incredibly important carbon storage areas. So they, depending on the estimates you go to, include about 50% of the Earth's above ground biomass and account for about 30% of the productivity to how much carbon is cycling in and out of terrestrial systems at a given point. This is a map showing above ground biomass, shown as kind of topography. So you can see just the areas highlighted in dark green across the tropics, emphasizing its importance. And African tropical forests in particular are being shown to be incredibly important to this story around climate change. These are a couple different studies that have come out converging on similar results. I'm going to try to move this here just for a second so you can see this. Two different studies that point to just how important Central African tropical forests are and potentially being more resistant or resilient to climate change. So in this case, it's referring to a lot of work that's looked at climate anomalies, like the 2015 El Nino that led to really big droughts across the tropics and tons of tree mortality and fires. While we saw declines in basically a switching of the ability of tropical forests in the Americas and Asia, going from storage systems, so pulling carbon out of the atmosphere, they became sources of carbon to the atmosphere. We didn't see that in Africa. The forests in Central Africa appear to be far more resistant and resilient to these types of climate anomalies. We don't know why that is, and we don't know how long that's going to last. So there's a huge amount of work to better understand that I think UCLA and the Congo Basin Institute is really poised to lead. This is a paper that actually called for funding. It came out in Nature last year, led by a lot of the top scientists working on this topic, to invest directly into this type of research because it is so globally critical. In terms of, this is actually a map from that publication where we're already working. We have quite a lot of activities and engagement in Cameroon, as well as activities that are starting to expand into places like Equatorial Guinea, Gabon, and the Democratic Republic of Congo. The importance of understanding these ecosystems, this is actually taken at one of our one of the areas where we do quite a lot of work in the Jah Forest Reserve in southern Cameroon. There's a huge amount of heterogeneity across tropical forests. It points to some of the reasons why we might see massively different responses of these ecosystems to climate-related changes. And understanding, one, what is that heterogeneity in terms of ecosystem structure and function? And two, how does it play into how these systems are going to respond in the future and interact with things like resources that people depend upon and the services that they provide? That's going to be a critical question. I do a lot of work with remote sensing data, which is both airborne and satellite remote sensing data, and it's increasingly allowing us to understand what these differences in ecosystem structure and function are across really large landscapes at these kind of policy relevant scales. So this is an example of a data type that we use really regularly, LiDAR data. You're seeing an agricultural plantation in the foreground, an oil palm plantation, and then a forest reserve in the background. And these type of data are not as available in Central Africa as they are in other parts of the tropics. Most of this type of data collection has been focused on the Amazon, in some cases, Southeast Asia. We just don't have these types of data to understand these ecosystems in a place like Central Africa. So I'm currently leading a very large proposal with a lot of collaborators, primarily from NASA. This would be to lead what's called the next NASA terrestrial ecology campaign. It would be, if funded, a 6 to 9 year campaign with tens of millions of dollars supporting it, that would also ultimately lead to many other government agencies providing funding support as well. Our key science question here is, how will tropical forests differ in their response to climate change? And there's many, many collaborators we're engaging with. These are the leads on the proposal with me, and the schematic on the right here that I'm showing you is from the previous campaign, which is wrapping up right now, called Above. And it's very multi-scalar in nature, integrating information from field measurements to flux towers to airborne and satellite measurements. It's a massive, massive, massive opportunity to build out capacity and conduct really cutting edge research in this area. Prior to this Above campaign, there was only one in the tropics in Brazil, and that has led to decades of long-term data collection and capacity building. Many, many people have continued into entire careers coming out of that campaign. So there's a real opportunity here. The last thing I'll mention is this flux tower that currently working closely with the Cameroonian government to develop and collaborators at the University of Yaoundé. This is the only way that we can directly measure gas exchange. So in particular, think about carbon, how much carbon is coming in from the atmosphere to these forests and how much is going back out. So on net, how much of these forests storing. In the US, we have hundreds of these. In the Amazon, we have about 12. There's one in Central Africa and it's only 2 years old. And we're working in partnership with that group as well and trying to establish more of these. It's something that the Cameroonian government and Ministry of Forestry is really excited about, but there's years of planning needed to get this up. So just to wrap up, I think one of the things too that's important to reiterate is that CBI is a bit unique in that it's not just a grant and a specific project. It's a long-term initiative in a place that is really resource strapped. So we at CBI have leaned on grants for funding heavily, but increasingly recognize that building out the Congo Basin Institute endowment, which was just created, I believe last year, and is starting to be grown, is really going to be what will constitute the mortar between the bricks, so to speak. So to have a long-term engaged operation like CBI, you can't just rely on jumping from one grant to the next. And there's often limits to what agencies will allow you to support with grant funding. And so an endowment will allow for funding the staff, funding the people, funding the infrastructure, things that are otherwise not easily supported. And then there's a handful of these other specific initiatives that we are actively seeking funding for through different philanthropic relationships. With that, I want to thank you all for your attention, and really truly thank you, Tracy, for the opportunity to share some information about the Congo Basin Institute with all of you. And I'm happy to take questions if we have time. Yeah.
I just wanted to say, it's actually gratifying to see really that we're getting ahead of a problem before it actually gets worse. Because, you know, we used to think the ocean was this unlimited reservoir that we could throw all our garbage and waste in, and nothing would happen. It's so fast. I mean, I would believe that the fact that the African, I want to make sure it's resistant, the African forests are resistant to climate change will not last forever. That there's going to be a point that our, civilization will overwhelm it. And the fact that you're actually ahead of the curve, looking at to see what makes this different than another forest across the world is really nice to see that for the first time. We're not trying to fix the problem, but maybe keep something going forward and staying a little ahead of the problem.
Yeah, thanks for that. I mean, that's exactly how I'm thinking about it. And I know many of the people I work with too. There's a real opportunity, I think, in part because of the potential role these ecosystems play in global solutions, but also thinking about the many trade-offs that are going to inherently arise and are already arising in terms of development needs and trajectories. How do you do that sustainably in a place where we know these critical ecosystems exist, but there's this daily demand on getting people to a point at which they can survive, and not just survive, but thrive. And so there's really, really tough questions around the future trajectories of these parts of the world, and I think real opportunities for research and engagement to think differently about it.
Thank you so much, Elsa. And I think I will speak for all of us that it's really gratifying to know that UCLA is engaging in this really authentic way, in really important work. Was there a question that we missed? Okay. Thank you. Thank you so much. And please say grab something. So I know we're running a little bit behind, but hopefully we have 2 more brief presentations, but I think they'll do a really nice job of giving a broad view of where we are at the division. And so we'll move next to Steve Jacobson. And I don't know if I know the press very biology. She also has an appointment in higher institutions of the environment and sustainability. Thank you. Environment sustainability, great. So next, I'm going to introduce Dr. Steve Jacobson, who is actually a faculty member in my home department in molecular cell developmental biology.
Screen sharing.
Steve has been a little bit on the other end of this spectrum. He's been a faculty member here at UCLA since 1998, is that right? And he's a celebrated investigator of the Howard Medical Institute, a member of the National Academy of Sciences. But I think one of the things that I really appreciate about Steve is throughout his time here, he's been really thoughtful about how to, you know, not only advance his field of work, but also to build capacity for the rest of the division. So, for example, some of the crucial infrastructure for sequencing and genomics and transcriptomics and sequencing, Steve has overseen. He's been really thoughtful about helping us build out capacity for plant biology, chairs the search committee for a new plant biology faculty member. And so I think it's been really and speak for myself, and I think many of my colleagues, it's been such an honor to be at a place where Steve is a faculty member. And so his research has been looking at fundamental mechanisms of gene expression using the plant Arabidopsis as a model, and the implications are really vast beyond thinking about plant biology. It's the fundamental ways in which we understand disease and positive therapeutics really be captured by the elegant work that Steve has done and continues to do. So I will turn it over to Dr. Jacobson.
Thank you, Tracy. Really a pleasure to be able to participate here. My lab is working in an area called epigenetics. And sort of the formal definition of this is heritable changes in the way genes work. In other words, gene expression that do not rely on changes in the actual DNA sequence. So I think most of you will know the basics of genetics is genes are made of DNA. The DNA is made up of a sequence of 4 bases, G, A, T, and C. And changes in those bases can be inherited into offspring. So that's the basis of disease mutations, changes in the way we look, and everything else in plants and animals. So that's the basics of genetics. But it turns out that this is a newer area called epigenetics. It turns out that there are other aspects of the sort of code that can be inherited. And the one that we work on and is the most well-studied is one called DNA methylation. So what DNA methylation is, it's just a small chemical modification. It's 1 carbon and 3 hydrogens stuck onto one of those 4 bases. So there's G, A, T, and C. It goes on the C, and it basically modifies that base, and it turns it into a signal that can determine whether a gene is functioning well or not. It sort of tunes the gene down, or in some cases, it can tune the gene up. And what has only been appreciated more recently is that change can actually be inherited and drive evolution and is part of the sort of the code of life. So now we're working on this in, here we go. We're working on this in Arabidopsis, which is a small plant, easy to grow, kind of basic model organism that allows us to make fast progress. So in plants, this epigenetics or DNA methylation is really well inherited. And that can give rise to what are called epigenetic alleles, which are basically different forms of a gene that differ only in their epigenetics. So this is one gene that we work on a lot in the lab. It's called FWA. This gene controls the flowering time of plants. And in some varieties of plants, the gene has methylation. That's the M's here, which are sitting on what's called the promoter of the gene. That keeps the gene off. And that gives the plants their sort of characteristic early flowering time. So they send up a bolt with flowers. But then there are these other strains, which are called epigenetic alleles, in which this DNA methylation has been lost. that causes the gene to be inappropriately on too much, and that causes a delay in the flowering time. Now, what's remarkable here is the DNA sequence in both cases is totally identical. The only change is the DNA methylation. And this plant with the methylation, all of its offspring also have methylation. This plant without methylation, all of its offspring also do not have methylation. It's 100% inheritance. So it's like a part of the genetic code. It drives evolution, it drives human biology, plant biology. So we haven't known as much about how this DNA methylation works. We do know that these kind of epigenetic mutations are common in nature. Here's another one at a gene called Superman, and these strange epigenetic alleles, I personally named the Clark Kent alleles. This is, I worked on when I was a postdoc at Caltech and got me my start in this whole area of epigenetics, because we're looking at these things, thinking about normal genetic rules, and these guys just don't make sense. So it took a long time to figure out what they were. But it turns out there's a bunch of these in different plants that affect flower development. There's a famous one in tomato that affects fruit ripening. And then there's just a whole list of different traits that are affected in different plants. So they're pretty common. So what we have been trying to do, I've just been fascinated by this question of how is it that methylation can be so inheritable? It's almost like a part of the DNA sequence. And so when I came to UCLA, I set out to try to understand the detailed mechanism of that. And what I did is I took some of these epigenetic modified plants, started with the Clark Kent and this FWA gene, and then I did what's called a mutant screen. So you look for mutations in other genes that when you knock those out, you change the inheritance of the DNA methylation. And starting from that, over now 25 years, we've been able to build out this elaborate pathway for how DNA methylation is inherited. So a lot of the sort of bubbles here are basically gene products. They're genes that we identified from the screen that in the end explain really beautifully how that methylation can be inherited from one generation to the next. And I'm not going to get into the nitty-gritty details here in any way, but I thought I would just bring up one because I think it's pretty understandable, even for someone that doesn't, with not a strong background in biology. And that's the way that this so-called CG methylation is inherited. So what that means is the methylation is on the C, that's the cytosine. But whenever that C is followed by a G in the DNA sequence, that's called a CG. And it turns out that because of the way DNA is structured, there's always two strands and they pair up with each other such that the G's always pair with C's. What that means is that whenever there is a CG in the sequence of the DNA, there's also a CG in the sequence on the other strand of DNA. So that is a symmetrical sequence. Now, the way that inheritance works is that in every cell that divides, a copy of the DNA needs to be made. So you have a copy of the DNA that you inherited from your mother and father. And during that process, you have to make a new strand of DNA, which is a copy of the old strand. So you're also bringing over one of those DNA methylations on one strand. So what we figured out is that these two proteins essentially recognize this state. They see, there's methylation on one strand and there's no methylation on the other strand. That's the signal to just fill in methylation and make it look just like the parent strand. And it turns out this is the essence of how this works in humans, plants, every organism that we know of, because this process is so ancient, it actually evolved in the very earliest eukaryotic cells before there even was a plant or a human. So now in other work that we're doing now, we're turning to a much now less understood problem, and that is, so now we really understand how methylation is inherited from one generation to the next. But until just recently, we haven't understood anything about how does DNA methylation actually affect the gene? How does it tune the gene up or down? And so we're just getting started on that problem. A really fantastic graduate student in my lab, now a postdoc at Stanford, discovered this whole sort of complex of proteins that is doing part of that job. The key to it is this part of the protein here, which is called a methylation binding domain. So this is a part that actually sees the methylation, grabs onto it. It then brings in all of these other factors which turn the gene off. Now, exactly how that happens is going to take us years of additional study using all kinds of different techniques. In a separate project, a postdoc in the lab, who now has his own lab at Cambridge University, Jake Harris, discovered another complex of proteins with a different type of protein that can recognize or bind directly to the methylation. But this time, these proteins actually act to turn on the gene that's next door. So what all this has taught us is that DNA methylation, it's a signal that sort of fine tunes. In some genes, it's turning the genes off. In some genes, it's actually turning it on. But as I said, it's part of the genetic code and part of evolution because it's also passed down from generation to generation. Okay, now the last thing I want to touch on that my lab has been starting to do in the last few years is what we call epigenome engineering or epigenetic engineering. So we feel that we understand these pathways well enough now that we could actually kind of develop some tools and repurpose them, and we could send DNA methylation to any gene that we want and create new epigenetic alleles. So it's like a new way of, crop biotechnology, basically. So the sort of proof of principle experiment that this would work was done by Leanna Johnson when she was in my lab. And she used this gene FWA again. So just to remind you, this is this gene that can be in these two completely stable epigenetic states, we call it. DNA sequence is exactly the same. It's either methylated, and that causes silencing of the gene, so it's off, or the gene is unmethylated and it's active, giving this later flowering phenotype. So what she did is she created what's called an artificial zinc finger. And what that is, it's a protein that you can design to bind to any sequence of your choice. So we designed it to bind right here, and then she fused that to one of these components of the methylation machinery that we had discovered through our mutant screens. And she showed that that was sufficient to bring in new methylation right on top of where the zinc finger was designed. This then silenced the gene, as was evident by this now new earlier flowering phenotype. So we had changed the trait of the plants. And when we use fancy techniques to look at the DNA methylation, the details here don't matter, but the red, blue, and green are sort of different types of methylation, where we got lots of methylation targeted right on top of the zinc finger binding sites that we had designed. And importantly now, when we remove that zinc finger fusion, we remove by crossing that thing away, that new methylation, this new pattern which causes silencing, is completely maintained because the system has this built-in memory that can propagate it from one generation to the next. So now we've engineered this plant without changing its DNA sequence at all, just changing its epigenetics, and it has this new, now heritable phenotype. So what we've been doing in recent years is developing more sophisticated systems to do this using something called CRISPR, which is a very kind of hot topic these days. CRISPR is a way of doing genetic engineering that's very important for medicine and also for agriculture. And it's just like the zinc finger, basically. It's something you can design, but it's much more programmable. You can send it to any location or many different locations by simply changing this little red thing here, which is called a guide RNA. It's like makes an address. And what we've done is we've taken this CRISPR system and fused it either with the factors that put methylation on or some other factors that take methylation off. So now we can basically switch these plants at will back and forth between the methylated silent state and the unmethylated active state. Now, the real reason that we developed these is so that we have some new tools for crop engineering. This work was funded by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. And so with the purpose of doing some engineering for cassava varieties for smallholder farmers in Africa to increase productivity of their cassava plants. And we have been successful in using this technology to create a new variety of cassava plants that's resistant to one of the major African diseases. And this is in the test phase right now. The plants are being grown in Hawaii. It's something I'm really proud of, that kind of, you know, something actually applied that came out of all this basic research. So I'm going to stop there. And that's kind of in a nutshell what we've been up to for the last 25 years. I have been really blessed to have some amazing talent in my lab. This is, you know, my current group. I've also had just really tremendous research support. As Tracy mentioned, I'm a Howard Hughes Medical Institute that provides money for my salary and for the lab. I've also got funding from the NIH, the Gates Foundation, and the Keck Foundation. So I feel like I'm one of the really lucky ones that has, you know, this much funding to do this kind of work. And I know that, you know, part of the reason that we're all here is to think about, you know, what are the areas that are, you know, really need additional support. And for me personally, I benefited tremendously from coming to UCLA, a place that's always had a small but a really high quality plant biology group of doing really basic mechanistic work like the stuff that I told you about, which often comes out with some of the, you know, the most interesting applied things that you didn't even think you were going to find. And so, you know, if I were to, you know, put in my 2 cents on where additional resources should go, it would be in supporting especially new plant biology faculty. As Tracy mentioned, I'm leading a search right now. We have had a couple of retirements. I think it's vital that we replace these with, you know, tremendously good faculty. And especially in those first few years, getting off the ground, having that initial support is really sets the tone for their entire career. So those early setup packages are, I just think, are just a golden place to invest in resources. So that's what I've got to say. And thank you, Tracy, for, you know, organizing this, having me involved. And as Elsa said, it's just, you know, you've been amazing, Dean, so far. I'm just, you know, really pleased to help out any way I can. So thanks.
And I think are there any questions or?
What is a startup package? Like, is there a ballpark?
Yeah,
range, or-
that's a great, I'm glad you asked that. So, the startup packages have increased just because of the technology that's used by new faculty has become so sophisticated. So I think a typical startup package in the experimental sciences is anywhere between 1.2 million and 2 million. That's been our sort of typical.
Sounds right to me.
Yeah.
I was 300,000, but that was back in 1998, and the technologies were not as expensive as well.
And I think, you know, I think the people we compete for are just extraordinary. And so because of that, they also have other offers.
And they're gonna get those, they're gonna get those numbers,
They're gonna get those.
the best people. So if we can't provide them, we're gonna lose out.
So thank you for asking that, Jen. And I think what I love also, well, we're getting ready to get Lauren all set up, but one of the things I love about, both of the presentations you heard today, Steve really illustrated this a moment ago, is that what we are really good at is thinking about fundamental scientific questions, you know, what is happening at a molecular level. But I think our faculty are also deeply committed to thinking about what are the broader implications of the work that we do. And I think that's where some of the censures and some of the big initiatives come from. And Steve illustrated that really nicely. The work that you're now doing, developing technologies that are applicable in prosecution. So thank you.
Thank you.
I think we will, and I know that is everybody okay for just maybe a 2 more minutes? Will be wonderful. Our last presentation. So our last presentation sort of run the gamut in terms of career stage, the time that you at UCLA. And our last speaker is Lauren. And Lauren is an undergraduate. She's also one of the Lifetime Scholars. And she is a 3rd-year psychobiology major. So some of those pictures that I showed in the lab, I think that Lauren's probably already been in these labs. And she's just really an example of the star students that we're able to recruit here at UCLA and support with your, your generosity of our community. Diana has been working closely with Lauren as one of our mentors and sponsor, and so this is what you can see a little bit of what she's doing in the lab. But Stephanie, Lauren has been working in the lab with Stephanie White, who's one of our faculty in the Department of Integrative Biology and Physiology. And she also runs our undergraduate neuroscience interdepartmental program. So she's deeply involved in undergraduate teaching and undergraduate research. And so hopefully Lauren's presentation will give you a little bit of a sense of what happens here with our undergraduates doing research. So thank you, Lauren. And looking forward to hearing what yours.
Thank you, Dr. Johnson, for that lovely introduction. I apologize for the presentation. It's like automatically skipping forward, so I'll try to keep track of that while I'm presenting. But before I start, I wanted to speak a little bit about my time as a pathway scholar and as a life science scholar specifically. I'm grateful to join the program the summer before my freshman year. And although this is during COVID times, we weren't able to do our research in person. I was actually able to work on this project over the summer, this previous summer. And from this, I've learned so much about wet lab practices, which is basically like working with the actual organisms themselves, as opposed to dry lab, which is more like more data-based work. But from this, I learned so many lab practices and learned just so many things about being a researcher, and sort of like actually guided my field of interest to wanting to receive my PhD. In what yet? I'm not exactly sure. I'm sort of going back and forth between a couple of things. This project's definitely spearheaded that interest of mine. But with that being said, I wanted to talk about the comparison of machine learning versus traditional algorithms in order to assess song learning in zebra finches, which is a bit of a mouthful, but I'll get into it in a second. So first, I want to give a quick introduction about birdsong and why we're studying zebra finches specifically. So first, we have the male zebra finch on the right, which is one of the orange cheeks, and the female zebra finch. And the bird songs that we're studying are actually a mating song between the males and the females. And it's only males are able to produce this song, and it's taught by male parents to their offspring. And when we record these songs, it produces something on the right. And so I'm going to break down this chart a little bit. So we have the whole string, which is the bout, and from there we have each motif, which is that repeated syllable, repeated group of syllables near the end. So this is different than the stuff on the left because it's like more clustered together and they look pretty similar, as opposed to the stuff on the left, which is just individual pieces. And each motif is made up of a series of syllables, which is like those lines that you see. And next, I want to talk about the song crystallization process. So similar to humans learning how to speak, a bird, it just isn't born knowing how to sing. So actually, like I mentioned, it's pretty similar to human talking. So first you have your 20 days post-hatch, which is called subsong. And this is similar to babies where they're sort of making just abstract sounds, not exactly words yet, but just making sounds, learning how to use their mouths and use their vocal cords. And next we have 30 days post-hatch, which is known as plastic song or sensory motor learning, the sensory motor learning phase. And this is like where, sorry about that, this is where the heart of my research stems from. And this is similar to babies babbling and mama and dada, very short words, but starting to like use their mouths to form actual human speech.
Well, I can share screen and then that way, for some reason, I don't know why we're having a glitch with that, but it would help if I shared screen. And then
Yes, please. Thank you so
Okay,
much.
go ahead.
Yeah, I'm not sure why it's skipping
I
forward
apologize.
because I'm not touching anything.
Yeah,
Yeah,
we'll just switch over so that you're sharing.
thank you so much. I'm sorry for the
No,
disruption.
no, I apologize that we're having issues.
That way, let's talk, and she can control all the technology.
Yay. Yes, thank you so much. All right, so back to the sensory motor learning phase. So this is where the heart of my research takes place. This is similar to humans saying mama dada and like sort of that voice recognition and learning how to also understand other people around them. And last, you have 90 days post-hatch, which is also called crystallized song. And this is similar to human toddlers learning how to speak full sentences and just finally getting to that crystallized, like hard song stage. And why I'm focusing on day 45, day 60, and day 75 specifically, I'm going to get to you in a second. Next slide, please. Thank you. Yeah, okay, thank you so much. So I wanted to give a brief introduction about miR-128 and microRNA in general. So for those of you guys without like a large science background, that's totally okay. miR-128 or is a microRNA, and when microRNA does, it's basically produced in the brain, and it has the ability to produce by the cell in the brain, and has the ability to turn genes on or turn genes off. So in this case, we are focusing on miR-128, which is a microRNA involved with nervous system development and processes. And we have found that when miR-128 is overly expressed in the brain, it actually correlates to suppressed neuronal activity and motor behaviors. And this in the literature has been shown to link with nonverbal autism because you are sort of suppressing the ability to use your motor skills to speak. Contrarily, we have when you have decreased expression, you actually have greater neuronal excitability, which promotes song learning and sensory motor learning. So basically putting all that together, it's an inverse relationship between miR-128 production and speech. And why we're focusing on day 45, day 60, day 75 is because, as I mentioned previously, this is at the core of the sensory motor learning phase. So we figure that if we can sort of extend that period, we can extend the amount of learning going on, and in turn, extend the amount of speech able to be learned by these zebra finches. Thank you. And lastly, a little bit of background about machine learning processes. So right now, what a lot of people are using is SAP, or Sound Analysis Pro, and this is the tried and true method as of now. It's used to compare people songs to those of the tutor, and produced by Tetranovsky et al. In the year 2000. However, there are some downfalls to using SAP. For example, for the people, you can only analyze 20 motifs at a time, and for the tutor, 10 motifs at a time. And this can be sort of cumbersome, especially because you're sort of clipping anywhere from 100 to 300 motifs at a time. So the fact that it's so iterative can be a very long and arduous process, unfortunately. And additionally, you have to manually enter each motif into the program, which again, with hundreds of motifs, can take a really long time. And unfortunately, because the program is pretty old in technology's sake, technology age, it can't be run on all computers. in addition, the machine learning algorithm, which is what we're sort of innovating, can be used to compare people songs to those of the tutor over a large series of days instead of just one time point like SAP. And additionally, it was modified from Sarah Keen et al.'s algorithm, which was originally used for parrots to compare their songs. We're using them for zebra finches to compare pupils and tutors over a series of days. And because we can do this over a long time period, we're able to see the natural progression of pupils' learning. This tells us a little bit more about songs and their pathway. So from this project, we came up with two hypotheses. First, we figured that the manipulation of Mir-128 will actually enhance vocal learning by prolonging the critical period for crystallization. And secondly, the machine learning algorithm would capture vocal learning strategies not observed using traditional analysis programs such as SAP. And this basically says that manipulating Mir-128 will increase vocal learning, and by using the machine learning algorithm as opposed to SAP, we're able to learn more about birdsong. But in order to test the first hypothesis, we actually have to go look at the second. So next slide, thank you. So a quick little piece about our methods. So first we took a bow or a song recording, cut the motifs out of each one, and then put each motif into SAP and the machine learning algorithm to see if we got the same output. And from this, I actually had like a little bit of sound, but I'm not sure if it'll play. So I'll just explain what's going on the screen. So at the top, we have on the right side, we have the tutor. And you can see that it's very bright. There's very defined syllables. And moving down to day 45, which is the pupil song, it's like very garbled, especially towards the end. But as we move closer and closer towards that crystallization period, it starts to look more and more like the what's on top, the tutor, which is what they're learning from. And when we put these motifs of the people into both SAP and the machine learning algorithm, which is the top and the bottom graphs respectively, we see that SAP sort of showed what we see visually on the right, where the pupil begins to better mimic the tutor. And additionally, we can see this in the machine learning with the colors. So the green represents day. It's a little bit hard to see. Sorry, I apologize for that. But the green represents day 45. Day 60 is blue. Day 75 is the purple-ish, and the tutor is the red. So as we move toward through the sound space, each day gets closer and closer to landing on top of the tutor, which means that it's very similar. So based off these two graphs, we can definitely see that the machine learning algorithm tells us the same, if not more information than SAP does. And secondly, I wanted to compare the Mir-128 insertion or the Mir-128 sponge insertion, which is the right graph, to the left side of the graph, which is sort of your control bird that didn't have any insertions into it or anything. So when we look at our control variable, which is the left, we can see that there's actually two arms formed. The colors are the same. The day 45, day 60, day 75 are the same. But we see there's two arms formed sort of converging to that tutor. Whereas on the right side, with the Mir-128 insertion, we can see there's only one arm formed. And right now we're coming up, we don't exactly know why this is. There's several hypotheses as to why. My personal belief, again, we're gonna run some tests on this, but it's the fact that zebra finches actually have two learning strategies. Similar to a person learning how to play music, some might focus on tempo first before they get the whole song. Some might focus on individual measures before they get the whole song. And that sort of is represented by these two arms. Whereas in the Mir-128, we see that there's only one. So it sort of points to the fact that the Mir-128 birds, or the birds with the Mir-128 knockdown, are preferring one vocal learning strategy over the other. And lastly, some conclusions. So based off this project, we learned that pupils who received Mir-128 knockdown could affect the pupil's method of learning as I just described. And additionally, the machine learning algorithm produces the same output as SAP. In some future directions, we want to increase the motif sample size in order to get a clearer picture of the pupil song progression. And additionally, we wanted to add more birds who had the same tutor. Because we only used one bird for the sample, because there are so many motifs, we want to make sure that this isn't just specific to this one bird and can be applied to the whole population. And we also wanted to compare songs of birds with earlier and later days post-hatch, because now we can get a clearer picture of how the crystallization process works and how song learning works. We want to learn more about these pathways. And from there, I mentioned nonverbal autism before. So the hope is to sort of turn this into a therapy for people who have either lost the ability to speak or have not gained that ability to speak in order to help them. And from doing that, we can sort of zoom out and learn more about song learning pathways in general. And lastly, I wanted to thank Dr. Stephanie Wright, which Dr. Johnson mentioned before, for allowing me to come during the summer and throughout the school year to help work on this project with them. And I also wanted to thank Dr. Johnson and the HHMI Pathways Success Program for their funding and support and mentorship throughout all of my time at UCLA. But with that, I'm happy to take any questions anyone may have. Yes.
Have you tried teaching female birds any of the techniques to see why they never learn these songs when the males do?
It actually has to do with their brain makeup. So there's a couple things in the zebrafinch brain. I'm just gonna name a bunch of variables or names at you, but there's like LMAN and HVAC and area X, which are all parts of the zebrafinch brain, and that females just don't have. So it's not that they're that they can't sing because they don't want to. It's more so because they don't have the actual biology to be able to sing. And why that is, we're actually trying to figure out right now. Of course. Yes.
Very nice work.
Thank you.
I was wondering, thinking way down the line, how you might be able to apply these things to children, for example, children in special education, and developing different tools for teaching people, children who have different impairments. Any thoughts?
Yeah, so that's sort of what I want to do in the future, especially because I am a psychobiology major. So learning how thoughts work and how those different things work on a microscopic level is super interesting to me. That's definitely the plan. And there's actually someone in our lab working on that right now. As far as the actual mechanisms behind that, I'm unfortunately not a med student, so I'm not sure how that whole research would work. But eventually, that is the goal, to sort of zoom out and apply it to humans. I definitely think that's a great idea. Yes.
So great to see that there. Regarding the machine learning side of things, I mean, is that technology to allow you to be more productive, in your, I'm expecting it would be a lot more productive in terms of allowing the analysis than the SAP model.
Yes, definitely. I find that SAP is super finicky, especially because I have to work with it for the purposes of comparison's sake, especially compared to the machine learning, where I just had to click a button, check back every couple of hours to make sure the code is running okay. SAP tends to crash a lot, so definitely a lot more streamlined compared to what we've been using.
It will allow you to do the focus at 300 number. So that allows you to look at an exponentially larger data set.
Exactly. Yes.
And what if any limitations do you have in terms of using this? Is there any issues in terms of the availability of that? Resource?
Yeah, so since we're using something called RStudio, which is a pretty common coding thing in research, in biology research specifically, I'd say the only limitation is just being able to clip that many motifs, because that still is unfortunately by hand process. But other than that, just making sure that your code doesn't crash because of the amount of information put into it. But other than that, there aren't really any limitations. I will say one that I can think off the top of my head is that I mentioned sound space earlier, which is basically the 2D graph that I put all of the rainbow dots on. And right now we're not exactly sure what the sound space is. Or what that tells us. What I can best explain and how it's best described to me is that, let's just say we put everyone in a room with brown hair, on a scale from blonde to black hair in a line. And of those people, we were okay, how many people are wearing a blue shirt? And sort of rearrange that line. And there's hundreds and hundreds of variables sort of stacked on top of each other to create this 2D graph. But as far as what specifically makes one dot different than the other, we don't have the information of yet. So we're sort of lacking in that area, but hopefully by looking at it more, we can sort of create a clearer picture.
Great. Thank you so much. Hopefully that gives you a sense of some of the kind of things that our undergraduates are doing. I think that
one of the things Lauren is kind of a beautiful example of someone who in and out of the classroom is taking advantage of the best things that are here at UCLA. I'm sort of intrigued by the idea that there are these two modes of learning. And sort of like, what do we do with that information? How do we apply that information? And, you know, that's coming from the research from one of our third-year undergraduates, and that's happening all over the division. And so I just want to take this opportunity now to thank Lauren for being here with us, but also to thank all of you for your time and your enthusiasm. Thank you, Tom and Billy, for joining us as well. And certainly, I'm happy to answer any other questions, but it's just been really delightful to spend this morning with you. Yeah.
And thank you, Dean, for bringing us together again, showing the incredible depth and quality of the kind of work being done at UCLA. It just, every time I come, it's mind-boggling, the range of things going on here. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Olivia, did you have anything that we should add before, or anything that you wanted to remind me?
We'll be sending the recording and the slides to you thereafter, and then soon as well, we'll try to get the spring board meeting date scheduled, and we'll send out a doodle poll as usual, and we'd love your feedback on that. Looking forward to reconvening then. And then please feel free to reach out to Tracy or I with any questions or additional information. Thank you guys so much. Thank you.
Oh, and I would be remiss if I didn't give a special thank you to the amazing team that I am super fortunate to get to work with. Of course, you know Janice, you know, Olivia and Kelly, and our newest collaborator who helps to set this all up, coming to us from the you're new-ish, right?
And
1 month. Well, thank you for helping us kind of make this all happen. But we have a wonderful team. Thank you. Thank you, Kelly. And I think with that, we will call it a morning.
Thank you.
Thank you.